Well, good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well here. We're going to be talking about private school admissions testing. We got all the fun stuff about the ISEE and the SSAT. I'm Matt Kiesner. I'm an instructional designer here at Applerouth. I help write the books. I wrote our SSAT book. And yeah, we'll be talking about these fun things. So our Applerouth why, change student self-belief, so change their life. We got a welcome poll that just popped up there, so enjoy your welcome poll. And then we do academic tutor test prep and executive function coaching. If you are, we're going to be in the test prep world today, but the executive functioning can also be important where for students, especially for in middle school, about making sure that they're keeping on top of their academic work, managing their calendar and stuff like that. But that's something for another day. All right, so we're going to talk about some changes in the industry there, understanding like the testing options for this 2025-2026 academic school year. We're going to go over the SSAT, the ISEE, and then understand how these all get worked out. So the big news that's kind of in the inside baseball side is that EMS, and they're the ones who make the SSAT, and then ERB, which makes the IC, they are merging. And so it says before the end of the year, admittedly that slide was really written last year, though things are moving along at some pace. And both companies do have like some similarities and things where for the EMS has it they have the standard application online, which is kind of like the common app for private schools. And ERB has lots of grade level assessments that they're called the ERB tests that are kind of like the ICE that you take for admissions on there. So they've announced them. I have no idea how to say this. E3N is or E3 to the nth is their new thing here. But that's the new company. There is no more information about this other than they have a new CEO. But this website exists. So does that mean that there's gonna be a new test? I don't know. But here's the thing for this academic year, for this whole admission cycle, they're going to be keeping their lanes. So SSAT will be SSAT, ISEE will be that, and it's just two branches of a new company running concurrently. I have no idea if they're going to retire one test, still offer both tests, come up with a new test, which is I have branded the ISSATEE. That's something I just made up, but it could be one of those things. So for this school year, should you take or should your student take the SSAT or ISE, or both? The answer is probably not both, though it really depends on where you are in the nation there. Most schools partner with one test. It's not like SAT or ACT, where if you're in for colleges where you could take one or the other, and every school kind of sees them equally. Schools like only accept one or the other typically. And so it's very regional. It depends where you are. Like the best way to check is just look at the schools you're applying to and see what their admission standards are. So we'll start with the SSAT. So there are 3 different levels. There's elementary, which is for grades 3 and 4, middle for students currently in 5th through 7th, and then upper, which is currently for in 8th through 11th, though almost all upper level, it seems to be 8th grade because it would only be someone transferring within a high school. So, it's made of EMA there. And there is 4 different options for this, and this is probably some of the more confusing stuff we're going to go over today, is like different ways to take the SSAT. So they have monthly paper-based testing starting in October. So the October test has already happened, but there's November, December. There's actually 2 tests this year in January. They decided to move the February test to late January. That's new this year, but basically it's February test, like the very end of January. You also have a flex test and a benchmark test. We'll talk about those. You also can do it at home, and you can also do it at Prometric, which is like a testing center. So I've got slides for these things. so the standard test is you go in with all the students at a nationwide test date and take the test. It is the most available option, so you can take up to 6 times in an academic year. I don't recommend that anyone take 6 times, and that would honestly push you well into spring, which would be past the admissions. But you could do this. So um, starting with the standard test dates does make sense for most students. There is this thing called a flex test. Flex test is offered once per school year, and it's called a flex test because it's flexible scheduling. You schedule with a counselor, consultant, or some sort of provider, and the SSAT can help you find that provider. And then you schedule it for whenever. And so this allows for one additional testing. This is probably best used as like a last test, and as a to take it for sometime in December or January, where like you're just looking for one more score. Do you know that this one's a little more expensive, and you may also have to pay for the counselor's time on top of the SSAT fees. Benchmark is kind of outside of control. There are some schools that are they're terminating schools, so that like the eighth grade they they finish eighth grade, or they finish at fifth or sixth grade, and a lot of students are going to go transfer into a private school. So this is something that a school can set up if your school your students at is setting up the benchmark test. Absolutely take it; it fully counts, but it's not something that a parent can set up. Then we have the SAT at home. So this is something where it's offered on pretty much every Saturday, and then one Sunday per month. And there's also multiple start times. So if a student's on the West Coast, they don't have to start at like 6 a.m. because it's 9 a.m. on the East Coast. The other nice thing is that it's open, so you could conceivably start at like I think noon or 2 on the East Coast, because those time zones are meant more for West Coast folks. So students can only take one at-home test per year. During the pandemic, they were offering a lot of you could do several a month, but they've definitely pushed back on it. And so basically, the at-home test is an additional flex test. Um, so the at-home thing is like it's on a computer, on a secure a computer, a secure uh, testing platform. There's gonna be a proctor check, so students have to be on camera with the microphone, and they will ask the student to like show the room, kind of move the camera around, make sure that there's not a cell phone or a tablet or calculator or a dictionary on the desk. And parents can be around for the room check, but the students need to be by themselves for testing time. I would recommend the students that the parents be around for the check, because honestly, the having someone on online, scan your child's room, weird. And I think most kids would appreciate the parent being there on there. So um and so the structure is completely the same as the at-home testers. There's no like different testing style. It's not like the SAT, which became very much a digital test. So paper test. Um and the only difference is that because every student's going to be on their own timer, it's not like a proctor timer where kids around the nation are all starting the test. So they can self-pace, and that can be really bad. I had a student who took this. This is during the pandemic, and this was brand new, where the test should take about almost 3 hours, and this kid finished in about 50 minutes because he could, and and so he said he was done with the section, and surprise, surprise, his scores didn't go up, right? Because this is a fifth grader, he just didn't really have the maturity to kind of handle uh, this level of testing here. So uh, that was a mistake. But be aware that like if your student's taking the at-home test, um, I would recommend that to really think about it. I'll also say that the at-home test does have problems. Like kids there have gotten flagged for like the dog barking at the house, or like any kind of like extra noise is going to the proctor, which is AI assisted, so that it's listening for any kind of um issues. They'll um um they'll have a problem with that. So I wouldn't really recommend the at-home test when a paper option or flex test option is available. Another option is Prometric. So if you're not familiar with what Prometric is, that they are computer-based testing scenarios. Like people take like the GRE and stuff, and so a student can take two Prometric tests. So one at home and but two at Prometric. And you can find where the scheduling is. I mean, there's if you're in a metro area, there's Prometric centers all over. I think there's one a mile and a half from my house. When I did a check. Um, so the Prometric centers are like they you don't have to worry about like the sitting at the computer or the dog barking. I do think that like some students don't like them because it's primarily uh, a setup where the it's adults taking like grads level exams or like nursing certificates or something, and so it's not like a child friendly environment. It's and so they feel kind of out of place because the person testing next to them might be 25, and taking a job based examination or something. All right, so the exception of this is the elementary level. So elementary is third and fourth grade. So um, the they don't start offering until later. So they're it's not until December though. I did actually see. I think they do have November this year. So they've opened a little bit more. There's no at-home prevention stuff. They don't want to deal with the third grader on a computer. I understand that. And they only can take it twice in person, as well as the one flex test option. So fewer schools use the third and fourth grade. There are some other like JATP is one where it's different kind of an evaluative for younger kids, but some schools do use it. So know that elementary is different. I usually work with about like one elementary school kid a year. But so we're mostly focused on middle and upper because that definitely seems to be the bigger thing. Either fifth or sixth graders or eighth graders tends to be the what most you see. So the middle and upper have the same structure. So it starts off with an essay that's unscored. There's a quantitative, which is just math, reading comprehension, which is just reading, verbal, which is a 30 synonyms and 30 analogies. Then another quantitative, which is not any different than the first one. It's just more math. And then they may have this experimental section, which is like a random, like a one passage, a couple of analogies, a couple of math questions. All right, so the essay is 25 minutes. You get two prompts. The middle level is like one's like a narrative starts at the beginning of a story, and the other one's like a personal one. Upper level is one of the personal, or then like an analytical, which is like so not just a personal story, but like kind of analyze what makes a school good or something. So the essay is not scored, but it's sent to school for evaluation. I think it's part of the first impression, so we want to make sure the students take it seriously, and then write something that's appropriate. For as for a first impression, like this is not a good place to be weird. So on the quantitative, you cannot use a calculator, with the exception unless you can get for combinations, they do have a calculator one, but that's with appropriate medical accommodations for LDs. The quantitative section is not real heavy in terms of the arithmetic of it. It's a lot of logic and problem solving and seeing the easy solution for something. Um, so both of them have like arithmetic, algebra, and geometry concepts. The upper level definitely has more math. It's like the biggest difference between middle and upper. And it's going to go into like early algebra basics of linear equations, deal with negative fractional exponents, factoring, basic polynomial factoring, some spatial reasoning stuff. So some tip for that, see if you're doing a quantitative, read questions carefully. A lot of them are going to be word problems. And write down your work and then double check the answer to the question asked. Um, those are important because the wrong answers are a lot of times things that are true. So we got a question here. I think when you have no formula, and that's fine. But I think the biggest trick here, and we're not going to go through all the steps, but this is for the diameter. And if you find the area, you will naturally find the radius because it's pi r squared, but that's for the diameter. One little extra thing, of course, look at this, the radius is 4. square root of 16 and divide by pi, and that's the answer choice. But the actual answer is C, 8. Going to go fast through these. And there's also a lot of things with guesstimation. So this math looks awful. And I've seen kids do the long division on that. But if you look at the answer choices, they're really nothing near each other. So we can just turn this, this first one to 60,000, divide that by 2,000. Then we can do the cross out the zeros trick. So it's 60 divided by 2. The answer is B. Being good at SSAT math is about being clever, seeing the easy way to do something. All right. On the reading sections, it'd be about 7 to 8 passages. Depends on the test form. About 5 to 6 questions per passage. They can vary, somewhat, but maybe I'd have one that's 4 questions or something. Mix of all kinds of writing there, and you should expect to see some unfamiliar stuff. And lots of public domain stuff. So you may see like a paragraph in Dickens and not have any context. They won't say that it's from there. It's just grabbing something on that. There may one of the passages may be a poem. They definitely will do that. Not necessarily in every test form, but pretty commonly. And they may ask about inference and tone stuff. So knowing the words that describe tone, knowing what objective means and ambivalent and things like that can be really useful as well. So for reading carefully and actively, underlining stuff. Mainly, if you test online, there's no annotation tools, but you still have a piece of paper, so you could still write down some notes. Somewhere, these passages are not real long, but summarizing passages, paragraphs in there. Excuse me. The easiest way to do this is to find the is to eliminate wrong answers by finding the words that make them incorrect, and so focusing on what we like to call in our materials throwaways. And then the idea of tone words, like so if tone words, and then also figurative language, they will ask you line 7 is an example of, and the answers could be metaphor, personification, automatopoeia, that kind of stuff. So then, and kind of the more unique stuff, we got SSAT has verbals, and so there's gonna be 30 synonym questions and then 30 analogy questions. I think this might be one of the few tests that still exist that have analogies. So synonyms like there is no context, and they may test on like lesser meanings of words or less common meanings. So if you see the word flag, you might think banner, pennant, but actually it's a verb. So the correct answer would be to flag means to signal, right? And so thinking about that, which isn't necessarily hard vocabulary, but it's like specific use of things. Analogies is all about the testing the relationships between words. And so they give you 2 words. You have to think of the relationship and then find the other 2 words that have that relationship. So for these ones, like again, the objective, you might think objective as a noun, but if you look at all the answer choices, it begins as an adjective. And so we have to find out that, like it means, not having an opinion. So it wouldn't be offensive. It wouldn't be conflicting, though. If you object to something, that would make sense, right? Neutral, sure, that makes sense. Conclusive, well, a subject objective could be conclusive, and that's an association, but not the right thing. Bias, it would be the antonym. It's C. And then, concern is to frantic. Some people might say that those are the same, but actually, I would say that it's increasing. Frantic is more than concerned. And so, is balmy more than frigid? No. Is perturbed more than furious? No, that's reversed. And notice I'm reading them like right to left because that's like I made the analogy that way, and that's fine. Is elated more than content? Yeah, I think so. Is perplexed more than sad? No real relationship. We can move on there. And is reserved more than ecstatic? No. So it has to be C because again we start from a mild to a stronger, but in the same general category. And then the experimental section is not scored, but the kids do have to take it. The only exception would be if a student has extended time, they will omit that because the test is already long. All right, so the scoring is weird in this thing. So they have a scaled score, so it's from 477 say for middle level per section, and then 500, 800 per section for upper level. So you get a scale score for each of the 3 sections, and then a percentile that represents a student for the grade. So if a kid's in 5th grade taking the middle level test, then you would get you would just be for fifth graders, and it won't be compared to seventh graders. I think one thing is that because the upper levels out of 800, it's easy to have SAT thinking because SAT sections are out of 100, but the SAT goes from 200 to 800. So if you're trying to compare scores and you're like, oh, 550 on the SSAT is like that's kind of in the middle of the road. The answer is it's not. It's the 550 on SSAT is like an average student where there'll be a very low score on the SSAT. Other weird stuff about the SSAT is it's the only test I can think of that has a guessing penalty. Where if you make the wrong answer, you lose a quarter point. It's not very common anymore. A lot of tests have gotten rid of it. So teaching students, like one of the first things I do when I work with them, is teach them to omit answer choices. And it's okay to like leave things blank. This is not a test where they're expected to do get everything right. I've had a student who was in fifth grade and got into the 98th percentile, and she left things blank on the test, right? So this is not a test where you're expected to get everything correct, and you can still do very well, and not and leave things omitted. So schools care about percentiles, and I think most common question I hear is like, okay, what percentile do I need to get into this school? The you know very few schools of any are going to say, oh, if you get 85th percentile or above, you'll be admitted. And I think that's not the right way to think of it. And also since or conversely, a lot of families will like, oh, my student always gets all A's and his teachers love him. And then they take the test and he gets in the 30th percentile and they freak out. Um, it's because that percentile is just kids taking this test. And so it is a small, highly motivated, highly prepped population. And you're trying to get into like some of the most selective schools in the nation, right? So it's understanding this is not a nationwide percentile, and it's not should not it has no bearing on like grades or any kind of other sort of metric on here. It's supposed to rank students. Um, so schools will typically not tell you what the cutoff is. I mean, I think the best way to understand it is that they're trying to build a campus and they need different kinds of students, right? They're going to need they need athletes if they're going to have different sports programs, and musicians if they're going to have an orchestra or a jazz band, and they need actors and artists and stuff if you're going to have theater or other creative pursuits. So what they're looking for is kids to fit into these different spots, right? And the SSAT is just one metric amongst others. Um, I mean, I'd say that like there's definitely ways athletics can get you into some good schools for sure, or other talents. For if we're dealing with if for it's in the fall here and there's going to be admissions that are due typically in January, you're not like your student is not going to improve enough to be a star basketball player if that's not them, right? But the SSAT is one thing you can prove, with some focused study, and something that can be improved upon in relatively rapid time versus like mastering the violin or something. All right, so study plans. If you have not started studying with this for your student, is the time is now. I would like we're actually a little bit late, honestly. Um, so know what kind of test you're gonna take and what and make sure the student is familiar with it. So for paper-based testing, that's gonna be Scantron's gonna be bubbling. A lot of students have never done that. Like they've always been like they've either been tested online or some other thing. So I find that like I have to make sure students understand that like how you bubble and that how you skip things on a piece of paper, right? That you like and make sure that you don't get off because you skip number 7, but then the worst thing that happens is your answer for number 8 is you put in number 7, right? And this is real bad scenario. So like getting some practice with that. For computer-based testing, knowing like know how the format works, they have a sample that you can do from the SSAT's page there, so you can try. The honest thing is that there's really no help. There's no way to annotate. There's no way to like to highlight or anything. So it's not a system that really helps students very much. Make sure they understand that's the guessing penalty. and plan to test more than once. These are important things. You're going to try to finish up by the end of January for testing on there. They do have tests in the spring, but that's another like weird wait list scenario. It's not for most students. But vocabs take a long time to learn and improve. So like studying vocab, starting that now is going to be important. Getting used to reading older texts, all that stuff is good as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on the character skills gap snapshot. It's a weird thing that they do, and I sometimes have questions on it. But basically, it's testing these ideas. You see, about like the student's personality through a standardized test. It's something that students can do. It takes about a half hour. They can do it on the computer at their own time. It's not like locked down or anything. You can't really cheat on it. And so it's teaching students of these different scores and stuff. There's two kinds of questions: forced choice and situational judgment. I'm not going to worry about going through those, but they're you know there's not always a right or wrong answer, and so that hasn't gained the kind of traction I think they had hoped it had, to be honest. But if you buy an SSAT official test, you can take that character skill snapshot for free. So it's like it's a free add-on. And some families do, but I don't know how much schools care about it. All right, so moving on to the ISEE. So there's different levels there, and there are some differences. So lowers for grades 4th through 5th. So middle is 6 7. So the big difference is that if you're in 5th grade, you would take the middle level SSAT, but you take the lower level ISEE. And then upper again is the same 8th through 11th. So ISEE is used for ERB schools, and there's some places that like Houston, everyone uses the ISEE for everything. Ways you can test, so though there were fewer options here, but they are kind of similar. So there's the at home, the prometric, and the paper based there. The most important thing on ISEE is that there are testing seasons, and there's the fall, winter, and spring, summer. You really can only use the fall and the winter because admissions are done by January, end of January. So you need to test in fall. So it needs to be something where the like you have to do that test, because if you don't, you only have one opportunity to take it. So the definitely SSAT allows a lot more opportunities on there. So yeah, we're already near the end of October, so like getting a fall test date would be really important, because knowing that it's going to be hard to test during the Thanksgiving week. So the most common way to take is probably the at home. They offer like pretty much every weekday and some weekends. Their weekends are not ideal because kids are in school, but it's the same thing. They're going to do like a live check with the proctor and stuff. But there's definitely a lot more options than that than in person. There's also the prometric option, same thing as like the SSAT. You go into the place, you take it. So same sort of thing. It's distraction free. Don't worry about the connection. There is paper-based testing, but I'll tell you, it is hard to find a place that'll do it. And there is no national test date, so you can't say, "Oh, like we're going to test, the second week of November." Depending on you have to look by zip code and stuff. There are not a lot of options, and even like I've looked at things like New York City, and found very few places to test. Uh, and yeah, like so do not assume that you'll easily find a place to test, and then know that things are going to fill up for this as well. All right, so we'll talk about the ICE structure and strategies here, and the similarities and differences between that and the SSAT. So you'll see, so some of this is very much the same. Start off with the verbal. Here it's synonyms and sentence completions. Then there's quantitative reasoning, and that is math, but kind of distinct. There's reading comprehension, which makes sense. Then mathematical achievement. So the kind of math they test in quantitative reasoning and then math achievement is not the same. And this one ends with an essay. So the verbal is not too tough on the ISE. It's like you get 20 multiple choice questions, and they don't test as hard of a words. And then sense completions, where It's like a logic thing. The SAT has used to have, and then kind of has now, where you have to use logic to figure out which one makes it, which one fills the blank. So the verbal is not too tough on this test. The SSAT verbal is harder for sure, and I think the analogies are harder than a sentence completion. A sentence completion here is it's a good for clues, right? And kind of figure those out. So for the quantitative math, there is 20 like multiple choice questions, and they're focusing on logic and analysis. So this is like kind of puzzle math. And then there's 17 of these quantitative reasoning questions. And so these are like they used to they have them on the old SAT and then some other tests, but it's like undetermined which quantity if you can determine it is greater. And there's no calculator in the ISEE, and you can't even get a combination for it. Like there's no calculator, period. So the quantitative, they might do some weird stuff here. So here's like understanding weird functions, and so this function is just made up, but we know function notation. So if it says for 4, you plug in 4, right? So it's like 2 times 4 squared plus 6 times 4. Um, do the math. But it's testing if you can figure that out. They might have some like so here like there's a lot of data representation statistics on here, so understanding like what happens if you change data. And then the quantitative reasoning, they always have the same answers. So like A is greater, B is greater, they're equal, or you cannot determine on there. And so with variables, and they do use a lot of variables in this, like knowing about like the range of variables. So you can try all real numbers, like so maybe they make the values positive, make the values negative, see if they're how many put fractions there, see if we put in 0, that kind of stuff. And so we can play with this, and we'll just do the first one here. X squared versus x cubed. Um, well, you might say, okay, b is greater because I plugged in 2, and then you get x squared is 4, x cubed is 8. But what if it was -2, right? Because then you would get +4, -8. Or what if you had said x is 0, and then they would be equal? So this one would definitely be D, cannot be determined, because the rules of exponents are varied enough that you won't always get the same answer. Like it's like I can I can show where column A is greater, column B is greater, or they're equal by different values, so therefore it must be D. So those are kind of like tricky puzzle math. Then we got the reading. So it's 6 passages, 6 questions each. The reading's pretty easy on the ISEE. It's a lot of like contemporary expository writing. Um, there might be some narrative passages, but not too much. It's not going to be like old writing like you see in the SSAT. That question on structure and purpose and main idea, that kind of stuff. Definitely, read actively, carefully. All this is same as the SSAT. Find out supported words. There's going to be some vocab context questions, so like make sure you go in context. But it's a pretty straightforward reading test, honestly. The mathematical achievement is different. It's testing how much math you know, and it goes way above grade level. So like for 8th graders, they're gonna ask like trigonometry questions, matrices. There's like really trying to see like are you above grade level on there. And so this kind of math wouldn't show up on the SSAT on the upper level, but here I was understanding difference of squares. I mean, there's an easy way to do it, but you definitely need to know like what you're doing. And then for the essay, it's like 30 minutes one prompt. It's just like an open-ended questions like, should we be nice to each other or something, or mind over matter? Do you agree or something like that? It's not scored, sent to schools, same deal. Part of like doing well. People are reading it and they're using it to evaluate you. They're just not telling you, giving you any feedback. There's also a weird thing with the ISEE is that the essay must be written in pen. You can't write in pencil on there. Black or blue pen. I don't know. That's just they've had that rule for a long time. So you take the rust test in pencil and you transition to pen. Okay, so the scoring here is wacky as well. Cassie has one of the strangest scoring scales, which is just like 7, 69, 40. No idea where that comes from. It's very unique on there for all sections. You also get a percentile score and then a ST9. So ST9s are like a way of looking at percentiles and kind of grouping them in there. And so a lot of schools will like look more for percentiles, and and here like you might see like, oh yeah, like we kind of expect like if you get a 7 or above, stay 9 on there. It's also like here's this like stay 9 scores are like they're standardized, so this is the stay 9 scale. Um, so about that is that it's not like evenly distributed. Like a CNF 5, it's like from 40th percentile to 59th percentile, but like C9 is only from 96th percentile to 99th percentile. And so it definitely does push towards the middle, and it's not something I'm thinking like, oh, it's like cutting them into tens, right? It is very much a curve on there. So study plan's about the same. I mean, know how you're testing, and like finding the test dates for IC is not easy. You will have to do the research for that for where you live. Um, and that's important. If not, you're gonna have to do at home testing, and then probably know that it's gonna be during the day, so a student will have to like either have a day off or not be at school. Vocab is always helpful in this. But like knowing that if you're really trying to do well in ISE, it's probably going to involve learning some new concepts and pushing in math to get that math achievement score up. Okay, so thank you all for hanging out. If you're interested in some prep stuff, this is what we do. Um, and we will be handling. There's a little follow-up poll there. Um, but that will be it for us tonight. Um, so I appreciate everyone having a good time, and I hope to see you later.